Hello, I'm Helen Bradley. Welcome to this video tutorial. In this tutorial, I'm going to show you how to make a selection around a house or something else that has a sort of architectural quality to it so that you can do something with the selected element. Before we get started with this video tutorial, let's look and see what it is that we're trying to achieve. In another video tutorial, I showed you how you can recolor a house, but of course before you can do that, you need to make a selection of the house. And this is the image that we were starting with, and I'm going to show you how you can make a selection of the colored portion of the image that you want to recolor. Now this is equally as appropriate a process for recoloring your house as it is for doing something else with the image. But what I'm going to do is show you one or two of the techniques that I used to make a successful selection here, and some things that you might be able to add and use in your Photoshop workflow. To get started with this video tutorial, if you want to follow along, you can find the image online. It's at Morguefile, that's morguefile.com. A Morguefile is a site for images that you are able to download and use. What you have to do is you have to do something with the images, so you have to change them. You can't use them as is. So you can go to Morguefile and look up this image and then download it. Now I've got the image URL for you, so I'm going to actually add that to the video, so it's going to make it a little bit easier for you to find this image so that you can go and grab it and follow along. So let's just tuck this out of the way for now, and I've got my copy of the image here. And this is what we're going to do in this video tutorial. We're going to mask it, and I'm going to show you how I went about and did that. So I'm going to start by just getting rid of the mask from this image. So we're going to start with the regular image, and I'm just going to reset it to what it's going to look like when you get it, because it's going to have a background layer. So the first thing you're going to do is double click on this layer and just click OK. And that will convert it from a background layer into a regular layer. And then we're ready to go ahead and mask it. But first of all, we're going to duplicate this layer by right-clicking on it and choose Duplicate Layer. Or even more easily, you can just grab this layer and drop it onto the new layer icon here. Either way, you end up with a second layer. Now, the first thing we're going to do here is to try and select out this gray color. And there are a number of ways to do it, but obviously the easier way is going to be the best way. And there are a couple of things that I would try. One of them is I would try the color select. So I'm going to choose Select Color Range and see if that can help me. What I'm going to do is I'm going to use sample colors. So here I want to be in sample colors, and I want to click the plus sign in a minute. But first of all, I want to sample something that is this gray color. And then I want to be able to add to my selection, so I'm going to click this second eyedropper. I'm going to start adding things to this. So I'm going to click on things that are this same grey color, but which perhaps are in shadow areas. So I want the Photoshop tool to do a lot of the selection work for me, but I don't want this roof, so I'm going to go to the minus here. I'm going to start clicking on things I want to remove. In other words, this roof line is one of the areas that is going. And I can adjust the fuzziness slider to see if that helps. But you know, really, probably for this image, because the image is grey, we're not going to get a lot of joy out of this color range tool. So I'm actually going to cancel out of there, and I'm going to say, no, that's really not working for me. I'm going to try a second tool, and this is probably the tool of choice, the Quick Selection tool. Now, it's one of those fairly ham-fisted tools, but it does a reasonably good job. I have a fairly small brush right now, but it doesn't really matter. I'm going to start clicking and dragging over the area of the image I want to select, and I'm making sure that up here on the toolbar the second of these icons is selected, and it's got a little plus symbol. In other words, every time I click or drag on something, it's being added to the selection, because this is really quite a complex selection and we want these areas to be added to it. Now every so often this brush is going to take off, and it just has taken off here, and it's added this piece of wooden display here into my selection. So I'm going to hold down the Alt or Option key on the Mac and just select over the area that I want to remove from the selection. And Photoshop will learn as I do this. It gets pretty smart in terms of what I want to have selected and what I don't want to have selected. So I'm still in this plus mode, and I'm just going to go and make as good a selection as I can. Anything that obviously shouldn't be in the selection, I'm going to try and remove. I certainly want to stop it from bleeding into the roof if I possibly can, because that's a benefit of this tool over the color range. Well, there's a couple of benefits of this tool over color range. One of them is that I can probably keep the roof out of the way, but the other one is that I'm grabbing all of these dark lines in the weatherboard, so I'm grabbing all the detail in this house as I go, which I really wasn't going to get in that color range tool. So again, I'm trying not to select the white bits, I'm trying to select the gray bits, and you know, it's looking like a reasonably good selection right now. I think that this part here is a wall. I didn't get that in an earlier video, but I think there is a similarly colored wall there, so I'm going to grab that. So once I've got to a stage where I'm sort of halfway to what I think I want, I'm going to save it. So I'm actually going to turn this into a mask that we can then start working with. So with this top layer selected, I'm going to click here on the layer mask icon, and that's going to add this as a layer mask. Now if I turn off the bottom layer, we can see how good our mask is, and you know, it's not bad at all. There's a few obvious bits, so I'm going to hold down or press the Z key and just zoom in to some of the areas that are obviously problems. This is a piece of timber. It's not the painted area that we're looking at. So I'm going to go and get my quick select tool again, just make it a little bit smaller using the open square bracket key to size it on the fly. Make sure that Photoshop is making a really good selection. I'm just going to fine tune that selection as I go by holding the Alt key. When I've got what I think is a pretty good selection around this area, I need to make this area black because I need to remove it from the house. So with black as my foreground color, I'm going to press Alt Backspace, Option Delete on the Mac to remove it. I'm going over to find other areas that might need work. I'm going to press Control or Command D just to turn off my selection because I had a selection in place there that I didn't get rid of. I think this is probably supposed to be white paint work. So again, I'm going to Alt Backspace, Option Delete to remove that from the mask. And I'm going to go around and see, yep, there's a few other areas that are fairly obvious here. And if the quick select tool can do the job for me, I'm certainly going to be giving it every chance that it can to do the job, because it's just so much easier of a tool to use than having to paint if I don't have to. Alt Backspace. So again, it looks like there's a bit through here that we want to get rid of as well. Okay, let's move this because I know that here is a bit of the fence post and here is a bit of the timber across the bottom of the house. So I'm going to grab the fence post. I don't want that to be repainted when we repaint the house. I'm also going to grab across these areas here. Again, just checking to make sure that this selection is good, and Photoshop is learning as we go. You may want to size your brush down if you need to get into a specific area. And then we've got all this green area, probably a piece of non-painted timber across the bottom of the house. Again, Photoshop's trying to make a really helpful selection here, but we might need to guide it a little bit as to just how much of this other colored timber we want to select. Now I'm going to move in here. There's a little bit more to get here before we go. When you're ready, just press the Z key to get back into zoom mode, and then you can zoom in and out of the house. Now, probably at this stage, I would call this selection reasonably good because I just don't know where the problems are, and it's a little bit hard for me to see them. But you know, as soon as I recolor this house, the problems are going to be really, really apparent. So if you want to see how this is done, you can visit my other tutorial on recoloring a house. But basically what I'm going to do is fill a layer with color and then just blend it in using the color blend mode, and then clip it by clicking on this layer and choosing layer, create clipping mask. Now the video goes into more detail because this is not going to work on a white or very light building. But for now, this is going to give us an indication as to how our mask is going, and there are places where it's not going very well. You can see here that there's an area that is probably clean timber that has been painted blue. Well, we want to go down here and we want to make sure our mask is selected. We've got a choice of painting at this stage in black and white, and really this mask pretty much should be black or white. I'm going to go and get the brush tool, and I'm going to select a fairly hard brush. So this area here is fairly hard on the edge. I don't want it to be 100%. So I do want a little bit of feathering, but probably around 80% hard. And I want it to be much smaller, but I can control the size using the square bracket keys, the open and close square bracket keys. Now, rather than trying to paint this, which is going to be fraught with difficulty, especially if my fingers get a bit jittery on the mouse that I happen to be using, I'm going to click here with the paintbrush. I'm going to go and line this up down here and shift click down here. What that does is it paints in a straight line. And since most of the things in this house are angled straight lines, this is going to be a really, really simple way of fixing the problems with the mask. Just going to paint in here because there's a little bit that is probably easier painted, but in most of the time you'll see that long lines of painting are actually better done using the paintbrush with a click and shift click. Click, shift click. Just neatens things up. It allows you to get into these edges without having to do a lot of laborious painting. Now the edges of this building here are probably need to be blue, so I'm going to switch my colors around and do the same thing. I'm going to click here and shift click down here so that we get some blue color in. Now I've probably gone a little bit too far over, but I'm just changed my brush around and I'm just nipping in here where the edges of the weatherboards would be. I don't think this needs to be perfect, but I do think I need a hint of blue color down the side there. I'm just going around this particular image and I'm just going to work out which area I'm working in. Have I got too much blue color leaching through, or do I not have blue color where I expect to be blue color? And then I'm just going to fix the paint job. Now here I've got some blue bleeding into the white, so I'm going to click here with just the very edge of my brush and then shift click up here in the same position. You can see I've tidied that up. This is a little bit more of a problem. For this, I'm going back into the original image layer. So I'm going back down to the very bottom and I'm going to go and get my quick mask tool. I'm going to make it a bit smaller, and because I'm working on this bottom layer, I'm able to select over areas which have been colored blue, which probably should not have been colored blue because this is a child's bike. And again, Photoshop's taken off. It's not really quite understanding yet what I mean here, but I can just work in this area and see if I can get it to make a better selection. And when I'm reasonably happy with that selection, I'm going to go and select my mask again. Ask myself, do I want this included in the blue area? No. Do I want it excluded? Yes. So black paint is what I need. I've got black as my foreground color, Alt Backspace, Option Delete on the Mac. And then just press Command or Control D. And I'll probably finish this off with a very small amount of paint work, because from here on it's probably easier to grab the rest of it just using the paintbrush. And because I've got a relatively hard brush here, and because we're just painting on or off with black or white, I can tap if I need to just to get a little area, or I can paint if I want to do that. So now we've removed the child's bike from the area that is painted. I can zoom back out and we can go and have a look and see what other issues we may have been facing. I think you'll find it easier by applying some blue color to the image to see exactly what is included in the recoloring and what is excluded from it, and that will give you a fair idea as to what you need to clean up. I find it's a little bit more difficult to do this if I'm just working from a mask itself, because it's just very hard to see with the mask exactly what is selected and what is not selected. Now I just want to switch to the White House, which is also one of the images that I used for this video tutorial, because I want to show you something in particular with the White House that I used to make the selections a little bit easier. Now when I was working on the White House to make a selection of it, I did pretty much the same thing as I did with the Grey House, and I made a selection using the Quick Select tool. Now the problem with this selection is isolating the windows nicely, and I had a bit of a problem with some of those, in particular these windows down here. So once I'd made my selection, I'm just going to go ahead and do that. I'm going to mask it by clicking here on the Add Layer Mask icon. I'm going to have a look here at these windows. I'm going to zoom in. Now I found the easiest thing for these windows was actually to use the Rectangle Select tool. So I've got it selected, and I'm going to add probably a 1 or 2 pixel feather, and it's really going to depend on the quality of your image. If you've got a really high quality image, then you may want to add a bigger feather. I'm just going to use the normal selection here. I'm just going to test this. So I'm going to select over this window using a rectangular selection, and then because I have black selected as my foreground color, I'm going to Alt Backspace Option Delete on the Mac to select that. And now I'm just going to go over and select these. So I'm going to get a much better result by doing this than I am to try and make a selection using the Quick Mask tool. I'm going to end up with quite a crisp effect around these windows. It won't be totally crisp because of the feathering that I've selected, but it will be very definite that there are windows here and there are window panes, and the window panes and the windows will be recolored, and the rest of the insides of the window, these curtains, will not be affected by the recoloring. So that is how I got through those areas. I also went down these areas. Here was not quite so much of a problem, but anywhere where it was a little bit difficult for the mask to pick up exactly what I meant and what I didn't mean, I used the Rectangle Select tool here. Down the side here, I just use my paintbrush. So again, picking up the paintbrush, making sure I'm painting with black, just tip the very, very edge of the paintbrush against that wall there, hold it down the bottom here in exactly the same position, shift click, and then you'll get a straight line, just feathering slightly the edge of that selection, just making sure that we're removing the background of the image, just leaving in place this weatherboard wall. Click, shift click. And really it didn't take a whole lot of time to neaten this up. Probably took me about half an hour to mask each of these buildings. So it's not an impossibly large task, but it really is one that you just want to take step by step. But this is a way of making it a bit easier. Now you can see I've got a problem here in that the window's been cut out, which is fine, but I've lost all my timber work. There are a few ways of doing this. One of them is to go ahead and grab the brush tool, go onto the mask, go and select white as the foreground color, and again with the paintbrush just click, shift click on the mask to bring this back in. Of course we don't have an indication as to what the verticals are going to look like, so I'm just going to click on the image underneath so I can see what it all looks like. I'm still working on the mask. I'm going to use the image underneath as an indicator as to where I should be painting. So I'm just going to adjust my paintbrush, click, shift click, click, shift click. I won't see a result until I turn my underlying image off to make sure that it's all working as expected. But again, these are solid lines or straight lines, so it shouldn't be too difficult to be able to bring them back into the image just by step by step making these lines on your mask. If you think the timbers here are not perfectly straight, then you may want to bring them in each individually as I'm doing here. Let's just turn the background off. You can see I've got one more to bring in. And now we have the windows in place. The outside of the windows are going to be recolored. The curtains or the darker areas inside the window are not selected for recoloring. A mask is a really handy way of developing this image because you can come back to it later on. You can work on this mask today, and if you're called away or you've had enough of it, just save the image as a PSD file so that the mask is saved with the image, and then you can come back tomorrow or at another time and continue working on the mask so you can perfect it over a period of time, and then of course go and do whatever it is that you want to do with your image. In the other video training I referred to, I'll show you how to recolor this house in Photoshop. It's not a case of just adding a color layer on top, because you can't do that because it's a white building, but I'll show you a trick or a technique for doing that successfully. I'm Helen Bradley. Thank you for joining me for this video tutorial. Look out for more video tutorials here on my YouTube channel, and consider subscribing to my channel and you'll be alerted when new videos are released. And visit my website at projectwoman.com, where you'll find more tips, tricks and tutorials on a range of applications including Photoshop, Lightroom, Illustrator and a whole lot more.